This video is an analysis of the second movement of the Beethoven Opus 27 number 1, which is an unusual work in that Beethoven publishes Opus 27 number 1 and its companion sonata, Opus 27 number 2, which is known as the Moonlight Sonata. He writes for both of these sonata quasi una fantasia, so a sonata that is almost a fantasy. And so what he means by that is that it is going to experiment with the expected structures. And so there is going to be a lot more unusual handling of the form. So in this particular sonata, you don't have any sonata allegro movements. And so that is unusual for Beethoven. And he also places this second section of the work as a movement that kind of takes the place of the expected minuet and trio, but instead of being the third movement, it's the second movement. And another thing that you'll hear in this work is that at the end of each section, he writes here attacca subito, so suddenly begin the allegro. And so you don't really have a clear demarcation at the end of the movements, but one movement leads to the next. And so when you hear the sonata played, it sounds like it is just, single movement work. So that for sure is unusual. And another unusual aspect of this particular work is the fact it's going to be 3 pages long. So it starts out here with this part 1, which is 16 measures long. And then you have this part 2 beginning there, and then it's a very short part 2. And then we have part 3, which brings back this opening, and then that cadences. And so this is parts 2 and 3 that are repeated. And he doesn't write trio at this point. He also does not change the key signature, but he does change keys. And so he writes this whole section here, this trio section, in the key of A flat major. And so that submediant key is unusual. The overall key of this is C minor, and so having that A flat major for the trio section is not the typical key, although, as you remember, using the major mode is typical of Beethoven, having this minor scherzo and then major trio. But the other thing that I wanted to point out that was unusual is that at the end of the trio section, instead of having a da capo, then he writes out the return. And he does it for a specific reason. And that is because at this point here, this was the repeat of part 1, which was 16 measures long. And then he writes out a repeat of part 1. Well, that's unusual to have the repetition of part 1 when you take the da capo. But he does that so that he can offset the hands. So the hands are offset by an 8th note, and it really makes it feel agitated and kind of frenetic. The left hand is played staccato, the right hand is played legato, and so you really have what had been coordinated as far as the articulation between the hands. Now it really has that contrast between them. And it's very, very effective. So that is something that's unusual, to have this written out repeat of part 1, which that written out repeat ends there. And he continues that for the whole rest of this da capo, of having the hands offset. And so this is all bringing back this material here. And so, this is all the same material that's coming back, that material there, and so forth. And so it does bring back all of this, although it's rewritten so that the hands are offset. And then at the cadence point, it is unusual because here is the cadence group, and then at the point where it cadenced on C minor, at the end of part 3 of that initial presentation of the Scherzo, it then shifts to C major. And he presents it an octave higher here, and he ends this whole movement with a descending arpeggiation of a C major triad. And then again, he has attacca, subito, the adagio, and it leads right into then the slow movement, which is in A flat major, the same key as what you heard in the trio section. And that we're going to hear at the end of the sonata. He's going to bring back that slow movement. So it has a cyclic element to it, and a lot of unusual features in this, these two, actually, Opus 27 piano sonatas. So let's look at the just the structures here and the overall keys of the Scherzo. So he's taking this pattern, so you have, you can look at this in either 4 or 8 measure. I think probably 8 measure phrases is going to be the way to do it. But at any rate, if we do 8 measure phrases, then he gives you this arpeggiation of C minor, and he keeps the same C minor, but then he changes to G major, and that's the end of the first phrase, or the first semiphrase. He takes that G major and he takes it down an octave, and then he's going to just change this note. And now he's going to keep doing that, where he takes this chord, restates it an octave higher, and then he changes it down a step. He takes that and presents it down an octave, and then that goes down a step. And then he takes that one more time, down by a step, and then you've got these 4 measures, and this, again, cadences on the minor dominant. So here's your 1-6-4 in the key of G minor, 5, 1 in G minor. And then that's repeated. So it's basically 2 phrases, 2 8-measure phrases. And it, it all sounds parallel. So, this in the second part then shifts, and it then goes from B flat minor to a C7, C7 to F minor, A flat, G major, G7 to C minor. So you just have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So you just have a phrase for part 2, so it's short. So this brings back that original part here, and this is part 3. And now, instead, where you initially heard this go up to G, so it arpeggiates C minor and then goes up to the 5th of that triad. What he does here, arpeggiates it, but he goes up a half step higher, up to A flat. It makes it even that much more, tension. Keeps the A flat, keeps that, and again he takes this and puts it down an octave. And then he shifts these voices down a half step, takes that up, and then this is down a half step, and then he takes that an octave lower, and so forth. He's doing the same pattern, but now it's just going to lead to a cadence on C minor, on the tonic key, and then that's repeated, and that's the end of the Scherzo section. All right, so enlarged 3-part song form, that's typical. And so nothing's really unusual yet in this movement. But now, what is unusual about this trio section is the harmonic rhythm. So you have A flat, A flat, A flat, A flat, A flat, all the way across, A flat, A flat. Now it finally goes to 7-7 of 5. 1-6-4, 5-7, 1 in the dominant key. So it's going to go from A flat major to E flat, and then it's going to be repeated. What we're going to see is that this does not come back. So we're just going to have then a second part. So it has repeats around each part, and so these 4 lines are the trio, and they are in expanded 2-part song form. So that is definitely a little bit unusual. But in the second part, it is really extending and manipulating the harmonic rhythm. So this is a 5/7 chord in the left hand, and you just continue to keep sounding it in that rhythm. He takes it down an octave, and he keeps resounding it, and he keeps resounding it all the way to the cadence chord, and he has a suspension even at the point where you have the cadence chord, because you have the A flat sounding in the bass. So that is a delayed cadence, and then finally it resolves to A flat major. So this definitely has a humorous quality to it when you hear it played. And it kind of sounds, like a horse that's just kind of cantering along. And yeah, it is light and has some unexpected things, This crescendo that you have here leads to, louder build-up, and then suddenly it's piano at the cadence point. So, yeah, expanded 2-part song form. You can count measures on it. It's kind of 1, 2, 3, 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Anyway, it is one of those that is just kind of, it's the same harmony over and over again. You don't really have that sense of cadencing till the end. So it's unusual as far as the phrase construction of it, for sure. And as I mentioned, then this is a written out da capo, and it's unusual here because he writes out the repeat of part 1 right here. And you usually don't have that in the da capo, but he does it to offset the hands there. And then it has a little coda or codetta at the end of this. So a lot of unusual features with the second movement of Opus 27, number 1. But if you have an example to analyze and you have a written out da capo, you always want to ask the question, why? Why did the composer do that?